The morning she said it, I swear even the coffee went cold. "Dad, we've talked about it," she told me, smiling like it was kindness. "You don't need to drive anymore." And there it was, 6 harmless words that somehow took away 40 years of independence. I just stared at the car parked outside, the same one I'd driven through every storm, every grocery run, every trip that kept this family running. Funny thing is, she forgot who paid for the road she drives on. That's when I knew this wasn't about a car, it was about control. If you've ever been told you're too old or made to feel like your worth has an expiration date, this story is for you. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. It helps more people find stories like this one. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Because respect, it shouldn't depend on your age. Now, let me take you back to the day it all started, the afternoon my car disappeared. It had been raining since noon, the kind of Portland drizzle that soaks into your sleeves before you even notice. Walter Grant sat by the kitchen window, watching the raindrops slide down the glass in perfect rhythm. 67 years old, retired high school English teacher, widower for nearly a decade. Most days, the quiet didn't bother him. He'd fill the silence with the crackle of an old jazz record, maybe drive his 2006 Honda Accord down to the library, or stop by the diner where his former students sometimes worked. It wasn't excitement, but it was his rhythm, his independence wrapped in small, familiar rituals. That afternoon, though, something felt off before the knock even came. Lauren always texted first. "We're dropping by," she'd write, as if she were doing him a favor. This time, there was no text, just the sound of a car door slamming, her laughter, and the quick, confident steps of someone who had already made up her mind. "Dad," she called, her voice bright and falsely sweet as she stepped in, shaking the rain from her expensive trench coat. "We've been talking. Aaron and I think it's time. You don't need to drive anymore." Walter froze for a second, his hand still around his coffee mug. The steam rose between them like a ghost. "I don't need to," he repeated, calm, as though testing the shape of her words. Lauren smiled, the kind of polite, rehearsed smile she used at work. "It's just that you don't go out much anymore. The car's getting old. We thought maybe it's better to sell it before it starts giving you trouble." "We thought," Walter echoed. He looked down at the small ring of rust on the car key, the same key he'd used every day since his wife, Anna, passed. That car had carried her to chemo, to the ocean one last time, to the very hospital where he'd said goodbye. Every scratch on that steering wheel was a year of his life. He set the mug down gently, not trusting his hands to stay steady. "Lauren," he said softly, "I taught ethics for 30 years. You think I don't recognize manipulation when I hear it?" The smile faltered for a moment, then she exhaled, pretending to laugh it off. "Come on, Dad, don't take it that way. We just want you safe. Aaron worries about you." Walter studied her face, not cruel, just careless. Like she couldn't see the weight of what she was taking away. To her, a car was just metal. To him, it was freedom, the ability to choose when to leave, when to return. The last piece of control he had over his life. Aaron appeared behind her, hands in his pockets, avoiding his father's eyes. "She's right, Dad," he murmured. "It's for the best." "For the best," Walter repeated. His voice stayed calm, too calm. "Yours, I suppose." Lauren frowned, clearly wanting to end the conversation. "Anyway, I already talked to a guy who's interested in buying it. You'll get a fair price, I promise." Walter looked at her, at the umbrella still dripping water on his hardwood floor, at the way she wiped the counter like she owned it. Something inside him shifted, small but sharp, like a door unlocking from the inside. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just reached for the set of keys, pressed them together in his palm until the edges dug into his skin. "If you've already decided," he said, "then I suppose my opinion doesn't matter." Lauren blinked, caught off guard by the quiet finality in his tone. "We're just trying to help," she said, softer now. "I know," Walter replied. "That's what everyone says before they take something that isn't theirs." Aaron opened his mouth, then closed it again. The rain outside grew heavier, beating against the windows like a metronome. Walter didn't look at them as they left, just stood in the doorway, listening to the sound of the car engine fading down the street. When silence returned, it felt louder than before. He stayed there a long time, staring at the wet pavement, the reflection of the porch light flickering in the puddles. For a second, he thought he saw Anna's silhouette in the window, soft smile, gentle eyes, the way she looked the day he bought the car. "Don't let anyone drive it but you," she teased. He picked up the keys again, turning them over in his hand. "Looks like they're trying, Anna," he muttered under his breath. On the table sat an unopened envelope, an old letter from a lawyer friend he hadn't spoken to in years. He ran a thumb over the seal, remembering the day it arrived and how he'd promised to deal with it later. Maybe later had just arrived. Outside, the street lamp flickered. A cold wind carried the smell of wet cedar through the screen door. Walter slipped the keys into his pocket and walked to the garage. The car sat there, quiet and loyal, rain dripping from the open eaves onto its dusty hood. He rested his hand on the metal, whispering, "Don't worry, old friend, they won't get far." He stood there for a long while until the chill started to bite. When he turned off the light, his reflection in the glass looked older than he remembered, but steadier too. Back in the kitchen, the envelope still waited on the table. He poured himself another cup of coffee, sat down and smiled faintly. "Let's see if you're still worth something," he said to the letter as though talking to a secret ally. The rain eased into a steady rhythm again, soft against the roof. Walter leaned back, the glow of the porch light flickering through the curtain. For the first time in months, he didn't feel powerless. Not angry yet, just awake. He glanced toward the dark window and spoke quietly, almost as if Anna could hear him. "They think they're helping. They just don't know who they're dealing with." A pause, a half smile. Then, with the kind of calm only a teacher could muster, he whispered, "Lesson 1, never assume the old man's out of moves." And with that, he reached for the letter opener. There was a time when Walter Grant's house didn't echo, when laughter still spilled out of the kitchen, and the smell of Anna's cinnamon coffee filled the mornings. Before the cancer came, before the hospital rooms, before the quiet. After she was gone, it was just him and Aaron, father and son, two people learning to live around the empty chair that used to hold everything together. He wasn't supposed to make it work, not really. A high school English teacher's salary could barely stretch across rent, insurance, and a growing boy's future. But Walter was stubborn in the way only teachers and fathers know how to be. He'd wake up at 5, brew weak coffee, grade a pile of essays before sunrise, then head to school with chalk still on his sleeves. He'd stay late, helping the kids who nobody else stayed late for. After hours, the classroom was his second home, rows of empty desks, the hum of a flickering fluorescent light, and his own handwriting still smeared on the whiteboard. Sometimes, Aaron would fall asleep on the back row, waiting for his dad to finish. Walter would look up from a stack of papers and whisper, "Almost done, buddy," as if he didn't notice the clock striking 10. When the bills piled up, he took extra shifts. tutoring on weekends, ghostwriting college essays for kids whose parents never showed up to parent-teacher conferences. He didn't complain. He just tightened the belt another notch and kept moving. The old Honda waited faithfully outside the school window, silver paint fading under the Oregon rain. That car became part of his identity, the one thing that carried him through every storm, literally and otherwise. There were nights he'd sit behind the steering wheel after everyone else had gone home, radio humming some Sinatra tune, headlights painting lonely streaks on the wet pavement. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was something deeper, that quiet ache of someone who keeps showing up because quitting would mean admitting defeat. People told him to apply for vice principal. More money, less teaching, they said. But Walter always shook his head. Someone's gotta stay for the kids nobody waits for. The truth was simpler. He wanted to be home when Aaron came back from baseball practice. He didn't want his boy to eat dinner alone. Aaron grew up watching that kind of sacrifice without really understanding it. To him, it was normal that his dad patched his shoes instead of buying new ones. Normal that every Christmas gift was something practical, a second-hand coat, a rebuilt laptop. Walter told him stories at night, poems by Frost and Whitman, about roads less traveled and men who kept their word even when it hurt. When Aaron got older, he'd roll his eyes and say, "Dad, you talk like life's a novel." Walter would just smile, tapping his finger on the book he was reading. "It is, son. Most people just don't bother to finish their chapters." After graduation, there was a small ceremony in the school gym. Nothing fancy, paper streamers, a foldable podium, that smell of floor wax and hope. Walter stood in the back, too proud to sit down, watching Aaron shake hands with the principal. For the first time in years, he felt the ache in his chest wasn't grief. It was pride trying to break through. Later that night, they stood outside their house, and Aaron handed him the graduation photo, the two of them, arms around each other, smiling under a sky that didn't look so gray anymore. Walter nodded toward the old Honda parked by the curb, its headlights catching the edges of their faces. "You see that car?" he said quietly. "It's not just metal, it's every mile I didn't give up." Aaron laughed, not really getting it, just a kid hearing one of his dad's sentimental speeches. But Walter meant every word. That car had carried lesson plans and late-night groceries, boxes of memories and hospital flowers. It was more than transportation, it was proof. Proof that when everything else fell apart, he'd still shown up. Years later, when Lauren started talking about selling it, about how it's just a car, Walter thought back to that night, to the weight of his son's arm on his shoulder, to the feeling of rain easing up after years of storm. The world had changed, sure. His hair was thinner, his knees louder, and the neighborhood full of people who didn't know his name. But every morning he still glanced at that Honda through the kitchen window, watching the sunlight glint off the hood. It reminded him that there was a time he had nothing and somehow still gave everything. And that thought alone made him smile. Because even if no one else remembered the miles he drove, the lessons he taught, or the nights he stayed late, he did. He poured himself another cup of coffee, still black, still too bitter, and looked at the photo on the fridge, a younger version of him, a smaller version of Aaron standing beside that same car. Not just metal, he whispered again, the words half prayer, half promise. Lauren had a way of speaking that could make an insult sound like concern. Every sentence came wrapped in honey, but if you listened closely, there was always something sharp underneath. At first, Walter didn't notice it. She'd stop by on Saturdays with a casserole, smile wide and say things like, "I just wanted to check in, Dad. Make sure you're eating well." It sounded harmless enough. The kind of thing any caring daughter-in-law might do. She'd walk through his kitchen like she owned it, humming as she rearranged the spice rack. "You really shouldn't cook alone," she'd say, pulling a pan from the stove. "What if you burn yourself? I can drop off some ready-made meals from Whole Foods next week, just to be safe." Safe. That word started showing up a lot. Walter would stand there, mug in hand, pretending not to notice the way she looked around the room, scanning everything from the leaky faucet to the mail on the counter. She wasn't visiting, he realized. She was inspecting. The next week, she came back with more advice. "That car of yours, Dad, it's pretty old, isn't it? Aaron's been worried. Maybe it's time to sell it. You could use the money for something more practical." He smiled politely, the way people do when they're tired of fighting battles they never agreed to start. "It still runs fine," he said. Lauren tilted her head, her voice soft but pointed. "I know you think it does, but we just don't want anything to happen to you." That was the trick. She never said you're incapable. She just built a world where he didn't get to decide anymore. Over time, her visits became routine. She'd wipe the counter even when it was clean, replace his towels without asking, leave pamphlets about retirement facilities just in case. Every gesture felt kind, but the message was always the same: "You're old. You're fading. Let us take over." Walter started to see it clearly. This was her form of power. Not shouting, not demands, just steady, polite erosion. And Aaron, bless him, didn't even see it happening. At dinner one night, Lauren mentioned she'd been looking into ways to simplify Walter's finances. "It's really confusing, Dad. All these accounts and papers. You shouldn't have to deal with that anymore," she said, stabbing her salad with surgical precision. "Aaron and I can handle it for you just until everything's sorted." Aaron nodded without hesitation. "Yeah, Dad, it's just practical. Practical, safe, helpful." Walter stirred his soup, pretending to focus on the steam instead of the way his son's voice now sounded exactly like hers. When they left that night, the house felt smaller somehow. He walked from room to room, noticing how everything she'd helped with had changed the place. The curtains she'd swapped for lighter ones, the labels on his spice jars, the little sticky note that said "Remember your pills" taped to his fridge. It wasn't about kindness. It was about control disguised as care. He sat down in his recliner, the same one Anna used to tease him about, and let the quiet settle around him. The air smelled faintly of her perfume, or maybe it was just his memory playing tricks again. He whispered, half to himself, "They're not helping, they're replacing." The next day, Lauren showed up again, all smiles and sunshine. "Good news," she said, pulling off her sunglasses. "We talked to a financial planner. He said it'd make sense to move some of your pension into Aaron's account. Easier for taxes." Walter looked at her for a long moment. Then he set down his newspaper and said, calm as ever, "Lauren, do you sell toothpaste for a living?" She blinked. "Excuse me, you talk like a commercial," he said, "all polish, no truth." Her laugh was nervous, quick. "You're funny, Dad," he smiled thinly. "I'm not trying to be." For a moment her charm cracked just slightly before she gathered it back up and changed the subject. After she left, Walter walked into the garage. The car sat there, dust on the hood, keys on the hook. He ran a hand along the faded paint, feeling the familiar bumps and scratches, each one a story. That car had seen more loyalty than most people he knew. He thought of the word safe again, how it kept showing up in her mouth like a mantra. Safe meant silent. Safe meant obedient. Safe meant he'd stop being a person and start being a responsibility. He wasn't angry yet, not really. Anger would have been easier. This was something colder. A quiet, growing realization that the people he'd trusted most were slowly locking him out of his own life, one polite smile at a time. He could almost hear Anna's voice saying, "They can't take what you don't hand over, Walter." So he didn't fight. Not yet. He just watched. Let them think they were winning. Because the moment you show your cards too soon, the game ends. That night, as he closed the garage door, he caught his reflection in the car window. For a split second, he didn't look like someone being replaced. He looked like someone waiting. The morning it happened, the world felt unusually quiet. No radio from next door, no birds on the fence, just that heavy kind of silence that tells you something's gone wrong before you even see it. Walter walked into the kitchen, same as always. He poured his coffee, opened the blinds, and glanced out toward the driveway, a habit he'd had for years. But this time, the space was empty. No silver Honda sitting there, no familiar reflection in the morning light, just wet pavement where the rain had washed away everything but the oil stain. At first, he thought maybe Aaron had borrowed it. Maybe there was some misunderstanding, some errand, some reason. But deep down, even before he picked up the phone, he knew. He called once. No answer, called again. Aaron finally picked up, his voice flat, rehearsed. "Dad, don't freak out, okay? Lauren called the dealer. We already sold it. It's better this way." Walter stood there, the mug still in his hand, coffee cooling fast. "You what?" "Dad, it was just sitting there. You barely drive anymore, we thought." "You thought," Walter interrupted quietly, "that you could decide what I need." There was a pause. He could hear Lauren in the background whispering something, her voice calm and efficient, like this was a line item on a to-do list. Aaron sighed, the kind of sigh that tries to end a conversation. "It's done, Dad. We got a good price. I'll drop by later with the check." Walter didn't answer. He just ended the call and stood in the kitchen, staring out the window at the empty space that used to hold 30 years of memories. For a long time he didn't move. Then slowly he walked to the garage. The air smelled faintly of oil and rain. Dust motes floated through the light like old ghosts. The place looked smaller without the car, like a room after a funeral, too neat, too hollow. He stepped closer to the workbench. The top was covered in small reminders of a life once shared, a wrench set he never used anymore, a dried-up bottle of polish, an old photo of Anna pinned to the corkboard. Her smile in that picture was effortless, her hair windblown from the drive to Cannon Beach. She had loved that car almost as much as he did. On the shelf below, he noticed a folded piece of paper wedged between two manuals. He pulled it out carefully, yellowed at the edges, written in her handwriting. 4 words, faded but clear. "Drive safe. Love, Anna." His fingers trembled as he traced the letters. For a second, it felt like she was there again, sitting in the passenger seat, tapping the dashboard to the rhythm of some old Springsteen song. He could almost hear her voice saying, "You always drive like the world's ending, Walter." He smiled, a broken, quiet smile, then the weight of it all hit him at once. The loss wasn't just about the car. It was about every piece of his independence they'd chipped away without asking. His home, his choices, his voice. Gone, one decision at a time. He turned to face the empty garage, his throat tightening. "They just sold a car," he whispered. "They have no idea what they touched." He sat down on the step, still holding the note. The sound of the rain outside turned into a steady hum, the kind of rhythm that used to lull him during long drives home from school. He remembered those nights, headlights cutting through fog, Anna humming beside him, the two of them promising they'd grow old together. That car had been with him through everything: the late-night drives to the hospital, the graduation ceremonies, the weekend trips when money was tight but they went anyway. It wasn't metal and rubber. It was a time machine, promise. He stayed there until the rain stopped, his clothes damp from the mist creeping through the open door. Then something inside him hardened, quiet but certain. He stood, slipped the note into his wallet, and looked around the garage. There were still boxes stacked in the corner, old papers, mortgage files, and the folder Anna had labeled House Legal. He hadn't opened it in years. He pulled the box down, brushed off the dust, and set it on the bench. The edges were brittle, but the seal was still intact. For the first time in a long while, he felt the old teacher in him wake up, the one who didn't let things slide just because they were uncomfortable. Maybe it wasn't just the car they underestimated him about. Maybe it was everything. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaled slowly, and looked at the doorway. The light was fading now, thin and orange, cutting across the floor like a dividing line between what was his and what they thought they could take. Walter reached for a pen, flipped the envelope over, and smiled to himself, not the kind of smile that forgives, but the kind that plans. "They think I'm old," he muttered under his breath. "They have no idea how long I've been waiting for a lesson worth teaching again." Walter didn't sleep much that night. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the sound of it still echoed in his head, the soft tapping that used to lull him to sleep when Anna was alive. Back then, silence had been peaceful. Now it just felt like something watching him. He sat at the kitchen table, the house dim except for the weak glow of the porch light outside. The check Aaron had left, the payment for the car, was still sitting where he'd dropped it, unopened, useless. He turned it over once, twice, then tucked it back under his coffee cup. The gesture felt final, like closing a book that didn't deserve another page. For a long while he just stared at the wall. Then his eyes drifted toward the old cabinet near the hall, the one Anna always told him never to throw out because it was full of important junk. Something stirred in him. He got up, joints stiff but steady, and opened the top drawer. Bills, old report cards, yellowing letters from students who'd gone off to college. Beneath them all, wrapped in a thin rubber band, was an envelope addressed in a familiar hand. Franklin H. Dwyer-esque, handwritten in neat blue ink. Frank Dwyer had been Anna's old colleague, a lawyer who'd retired before she got sick. A quiet man with a slow voice and sharp eyes, the kind of person who remembered details other people forgot. Walter hadn't thought about him in years. He slipped the letter out, feeling the weight of it, not just paper, but time. The envelope was dated almost a decade ago. The corner had been bent, the ink faded, but the seal was still clean. He sat back down, the chair creaking under him, and opened it carefully. Inside were 2 pages and a small folded document. The letter began, "Walter, Anna wanted me to make sure you received this directly. I advised her to keep it private for now. If you're reading this, she probably thought the time had come." Walter's throat tightened. He read slower. "The policy we discussed has been finalized. A life insurance claim adjusted from her employer's group plan. The payout value stands at $350,000 under your name. But there's one stipulation. The benefits are only valid as long as the named beneficiary, you, maintains residency at the current address. Should ownership or occupancy transfer, the policy dissolves immediately." He stopped there, staring at the words like they might vanish if he blinked. He ran a hand over the paper, whispering, "Anna, what did you do?" He unfolded the attached document. Everything was there: signatures, stamps, legal jargon, his name, her name, the clause written in black and white. The whole time, while he'd been drowning in bills and silence, this had been sitting in a drawer, a secret his wife had left not out of mistrust but foresight. She'd known. Somehow she'd known that one day someone might try to take what wasn't theirs. He leaned back, the air in the room suddenly lighter, sharper. "You clever woman," he said softly, half laughing, half crying. He pictured Lauren's perfectly rehearsed smile, the way she'd said, "It's safer this way," when she sold his car. The way Aaron stood behind her, quiet, complicit. They thought they were ahead, but they didn't know about this. Walter's pulse quickened. The gears in his mind, rusty from years of polite surrender, started to turn again. Every conversation, every suggestion, every visit under the mask of kindness, it all lined up now. They weren't just managing him. They were maneuvering him. He looked around the kitchen, the chipped mugs, the faded curtains Anna had sewn herself, and for the first time in months he didn't see weakness. He saw leverage. He folded the letter neatly and slid it back into the envelope. Then he whispered almost to himself, "You think I taught ethics? Wait till you see justice." He got up and walked toward the garage. The smell of oil still hung faintly in the air, mixed with the damp scent of concrete. He sat on the old stool by the workbench, the one with Anna's initials carved underneath. It wasn't anger running through him now, it was something steadier. Control. He realized that for all their talk about his safety, Lauren and Aaron had never once asked what he wanted. They just assumed age meant surrender. That politeness meant permission. But they'd forgotten what kind of man he was. He'd spent 30 years teaching teenagers how to spot lies in Shakespeare, how to find truth in between the lines. He'd seen every trick, every fake apology, every manipulation disguised as good intention. This was no different. He looked down at the papers again and smiled faintly. "You two wanted the house," he murmured. "Funny thing about that, it only pays out if I stay right here." He tapped the letter against his palm, already hearing the next conversation in his head. Lauren's polished voice, Aaron's hesitant nods, the way they'd try to convince him that moving somewhere easier was what he needed. Let them try. He placed the documents into a small metal lockbox, the same one that used to hold tax records. Then, almost as an afterthought, he wrote a note and slipped it on top. "For whoever comes looking, don't mistake silence for weakness." When he shut the lid, the sound echoed through the garage, sharp, decisive, final. Back in the kitchen, he poured himself another cup of coffee. The morning sun was starting to break through the gray, spilling across the counter in thin golden lines. For the first time in months, Walter felt like himself again, not a relic, not a burden, but a man with a plan. He took a slow sip, savoring it. Then with a half-smile he said under his breath, "Lesson 2, never underestimate a teacher who's still grading." Walter dressed up that night because Lauren asked him to. She'd called that morning, voice sweet like honey dripped over barbed wire. "We're having a family dinner tonight, Dad, just the three of us. I think it'd be nice to talk, start fresh." He almost said no, but something in her tone, too smooth, too prepared, made him curious. So he put on his old gray blazer, the one Anna bought him for their 20th anniversary, and drove over. Their house looked like something out of a magazine, candles, polished silverware, a jazz playlist humming in the background. Lauren met him at the door, her smile wide, rehearsed. "You look so handsome tonight," she said, kissing the air near his cheek. "We're just so glad you came." "Hard to turn down free food," Walter replied. His voice was calm, but his eyes scanned the room. There was something about the setup that didn't sit right, too formal for a family dinner. The table was already set, wine poured, plates steaming. Aaron sat at the far end, phone face down, expression tight. "Hey, Dad," he said quietly. "Hey, son," Walter answered, taking his seat. They talked about harmless things at first, the weather, a neighbor's new fence, some nonsense about the economy. Lauren laughed too loud at her own jokes, reaching across the table to fill his glass even when he hadn't finished drinking. It wasn't until dessert that she struck. She reached under a neat stack of napkins and placed a folder in front of him, crisp white paper, gold-tipped pen. Her voice turned gentle, deliberate. "Before you go tonight, we just wanted you to look over something small, nothing major." Walter looked at the cover. 3 words printed in bold, "Power of Attorney." He felt his jaw tighten. "You want me to sign this?" Lauren nodded, all innocence. "It's just to make things easier, Dad. You know, in case anything happens, medical stuff, bills, the house, all those complicated things." Aaron leaned forward. "It's just for safety, Dad, that's all." Safety again, that cursed word. Walter picked up the pen, turned it in his hand, and studied the papers. His name was everywhere next to blank lines, dotted lines, and legal paragraphs designed to sound harmless but smell like control. Lauren smiled. eyes bright with false warmth. "It's just paperwork," she said. "No big deal." He looked at her, then at Aaron, then back down at the neat, sterile language of betrayal. Finally, he set the pen down. The sound was soft, but it cut through the room like a dropped blade. "You call it safety," he said quietly, his voice steady as stone. "I call it theft," with a smile. The room froze. Even the jazz in the background felt suddenly too loud. Lauren's face twitched, a flicker of surprise before she caught herself. "Dad, that's unfair. We're trying to help you." Walter leaned back, folded his hands, and looked at his son. "Aaron, tell me, do you even know what you're signing me away to, or are you just nodding because it's easier than thinking?" Aaron opened his mouth, but no words came out. Lauren's tone hardened. "You're overreacting. It's just control," Walter interrupted, his voice rising now, not in anger but clarity. "It's every little decision you've taken from me, one polite suggestion at a time. My car, my money, my choices, all wrapped up in a bow called help." He stood up, chair scraping the hardwood, the candles flickered from the movement. "You two keep saying you're worried about me, but worry doesn't come with a signature line." Lauren's mask slipped for half a second. "You're being unreasonable," she snapped. "Maybe," he said, buttoning his jacket, "but unreasonable keeps me free." He looked at Aaron again, searching for something, the boy he'd raised, the man who used to laugh with him over bad takeout dinners and baseball games. But all he saw was silence, fear, and a hint of regret. Walter's voice softened. "I spent my life teaching kids to think for themselves. Guess I failed at home." Lauren's cheeks flushed. "That's enough. We were trying to protect you." He picked up his coat. "Funny, you don't protect people by taking away what's theirs." No one spoke after that. The only sound was the faint clink of the spoon against his untouched dessert plate. He turned toward the door, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Before leaving, he paused by the framed family photo on the wall, the one from Aaron's wedding day. They all looked so happy then. He brushed a bit of dust off the frame and whispered, just loud enough for himself, "Guess some lessons take longer to learn." As he stepped outside, the night air hit him like a wake-up call, cool, sharp, alive. Behind him, he could still hear Lauren's voice, low and urgent, trying to pull Aaron back into her world of polished smiles and tidy lies. He didn't turn around. The porch light flickered as he walked to his car, its empty space now replaced by Aaron's shiny new SUV. He smirked faintly at the irony. Then he slid his hands into his coat pockets, the faint crinkle of Anna's old letter brushing against his fingertips, the one that held more power than either of them could imagine. Under his breath, he said, "They think I'm signing something away. They're about to learn I'm signing something back." The hospital smelled the same as it always did, antiseptic and coffee that had been burned 2 hours too long. Walter never liked hospitals, not since Anna. But that morning, he parked out front anyway, hands gripping the steering wheel like it might stop his heart from changing its mind. He'd called ahead, asked if Maya Lopez still worked the early shift. The nurse on the phone said yes, surprised anyone even asked for her by name. Walter smiled at that. Maya had been one of his last students before retirement, shy, whip-smart, the kind of kid who apologized even when she was right. He remembered her writing essays on empathy and working part-time at the grocery store to pay for textbooks. Now she was 30, maybe a little older. A nurse, a single mom living proof that kindness doesn't die even when the world tries to bury it. Walter took a deep breath and stepped inside. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead and the linoleum floor squeaked beneath his shoes. He found her at the end of the hall, bending down to tie a little boy's shoelace. Her son. He guessed, same wide eyes, same quiet patience. When she looked up, her expression shifted from confusion to recognition. "Mr. Grant," she said, half whisper, half disbelief. You look exactly the same." "That's generous," he chuckled. "I look like the same man, just left out in the sun too long." She laughed softly, the kind of laugh that carried exhaustion behind it. "What are you doing here? I thought you moved away." He hesitated for a moment, then said, "I had some business to take care of. Thought I'd stop by and check on my favorite overachiever." Her son tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, who's this?" She smiled down at him. That's my teacher, sweetheart. He used to give me too much homework. Walter grinned. And she still turned it in early. Don't let her fool you, your mom's a fighter. The boy ran off toward the vending machines and Maya led Walter to the small break room. The lights buzzed overhead. A single coffee pot hissed in protest as it tried to brew one last cup. So, she said, folding her arms, what brings you here really? Walter sat down, taking his time. You still call me Mr. Grant. She blinked, unsure what he meant. He smiled. That's why I'm here. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. The corner was creased, but it was sealed tight. He set it gently on the table between them. What's this? She asked, wary. Let's call it something owed. She frowned. You don't owe me anything. He nodded. That's true, but someone tried to take something from me, my car, actually. They thought they were doing me a favor. His voice softened. Turns out they were doing me a lesson. She didn't say anything, just watched his hands, the way they trembled slightly as he pushed the envelope closer. I had an old friend, a lawyer, help me reverse the sale, got every cent back, and well, I don't need it, not where I'm headed. Maya stared at the envelope, her throat tightening. Mr. Grant, I can't. You can, he interrupted gently. You will. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. Why me? She whispered. He looked at her then, really looked, and smiled the way a father might when his child finally understands a lesson that words could never teach. Because you still call me teacher. She covered her mouth, trying to keep the sob from breaking out loud. The room went quiet except for the hum of the vending machine down the hall. Walter leaned back, watching her, his voice low and steady. When I was your teacher, you once told me you wanted to help people who couldn't afford to be sick. You said everyone deserves care, not just the lucky ones. He chuckled softly. You were 17, wearing a hoodie 2 sizes too big, trying to sound tough. But I could tell you meant every word. Maya laughed through her tears. I can't believe you remember that. I remember everything that matters, he said. She wiped her eyes, still shaking her head. You don't even know how much this means. I've been behind on rent, my son's therapy bills. I don't need to know, Walter said gently. I just need to know it'll help. She opened the envelope, her breath catching when she saw the check. This is Mr. Grant. This is too much. He smiled faintly. No such thing as too much when it's the right thing. They sat there for a while, not talking. Just two people who understood that sometimes the quietest acts of justice aren't about revenge, they're about restoring balance. When her son came running back, clutching a pack of crackers, Maya stood and hugged Walter, her arms trembling. Thank you, she whispered, for everything, for never stopping being you. He patted her shoulder lightly, the way he used to when she aced a test. Keep doing what you do, Maya. The world doesn't get better from the top down. It starts with people like you, one hallway, one patient, one kid at a time. As he turned to leave, she called after him, You sure you don't want me to drive you home? He smiled over his shoulder. I think I'll walk. Haven't done that in a while. Outside, the sun was just setting, a soft gold spilling across the parking lot. He took a deep breath, hands in his pockets, the air cool but gentle. Somewhere behind him, a little boy laughed. Somewhere ahead, the street stretched out like a clean page waiting for a new story. Walter smiled to himself and murmured, Lesson 3, sometimes justice sounds a lot like kindness. They showed up just after noon, the sound of their SUV crunching against the gravel cutting through the quiet like a warning bell. Walter was sitting on the porch, sipping his coffee, the spring sun warm on his face. He didn't move when he heard the car door slam. Some storms, he'd learned, were better met sitting down. Lauren was the first to speak. You can't just undo what's done. Her voice cracked, less anger, more panic. The dealership called this morning, the funds bounced back. You reversed the sale, that's illegal. Walter didn't look at her. He swirled what was left in his mug, watching the reflection of the sky ripple on the surface. Illegal, he said, almost amused. That's funny. You didn't seem too worried about the law when you sold something that wasn't yours. Aaron stepped forward, voice low but shaking. Dad, you're making this harder than it needs to be. It's just a car. Walter finally looked up, meeting his son's eyes. No, Aaron, it's never just a car. He set the mug down, stood and brushed the dust off his jeans. It's every mile I drove to keep this family together. Every trip to the hospital, every grocery run when your mother was sick, every late-night drive home from your ball games. You think I'm fighting over metal? No, I'm fighting for what it stands for. Lauren crossed her arms. You're being ridiculous. We were trying to help you. You can't handle everything yourself anymore. He gave a small, humorless laugh. Help, he repeated softly. Is that what you call taking a man's independence without asking? Her tone sharpened. You're old, Walter. You need to start acting like it. He tilted his head, almost smiling. Maybe, but I'm not so old that I don't know how to cancel a fraudulent transaction. The color drained from her face. You, what? I called my lawyer, he said evenly. Turns out when you sell something without the legal owner's written consent, the buyer has to return the funds. You see, the car was never yours and neither was my dignity. Lauren's eyes widened, her jaw tightening. Aaron looked down at the porch steps, hands shoved into his pockets. He didn't say a word. Walter took a slow step forward, his voice calm but sharp as a blade. You both thought I wouldn't notice, that I'd just fade out quietly while you rearranged my life to fit yours, but you forgot one thing. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folder, old but carefully kept. He flipped it open, the pages crisp against the wind. This, he said, is the deed to this house. And this clause right here, he pointed, says the property remains under my ownership as long as I'm living here. If I move, it transfers to charity. So you see, the only way you ever get this place is if I leave, and that's not happening. Lauren blinked hard, trying to process the words. Charity, she repeated. You'd rather give your house away to strangers than to your own family. Walter's eyes softened, but his tone stayed steady. Family doesn't try to steal from you while pretending it's for your own good. Family remembers what home means. Aaron finally spoke, voice small. Dad. Walter turned to him, the sharpness in his eyes fading into something quieter. I raised you better than this, Aaron. I taught you what honesty looks like, and how easy it is to lose it once you trade it for comfort. Aaron swallowed hard, unable to meet his gaze. Lauren, still trembling, tried to recover her composure. You'll regret this. You'll need us eventually. Walter's reply was so calm it almost sounded like mercy. Maybe I will, but at least when that day comes, I'll still have myself. He stepped past them, opened the front door, and paused before going inside. The house stays with whoever remembers what home means. Then, quieter, you should probably start looking for yours. They didn't move. For a few seconds, the only sound was the wind in the trees and the creak of the porch under his feet. Then the SUV door slammed again, sharper this time. Tires spun against gravel, spitting dust across the yard as they drove off. Walter didn't watch them go. He simply stood there, hand on the door frame, breathing in the silence they left behind. It didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Inside, he sat down at the kitchen table where Anna's photo still leaned against the window. You'd have handled that better, he murmured, smiling faintly. But I got there eventually. He poured himself another cup of coffee, the bitter kind he always made too strong. Outside, the driveway gleamed under the sunlight, clean, open, free. Weeks passed. The calls stopped coming. The house stayed quiet. Word got around that Lauren lost her job after an incident with a client. Aaron moved out of their place in the suburbs and was renting a small apartment downtown. Walter didn't take pleasure in it, not really. But life has a funny way of teaching lessons to those who ignore the first ones. One evening, he found an envelope in the mailbox. No return address. Inside was a short note in Aaron's handwriting. I'm sorry. You were right about everything. I'm trying to remember what home means. Walter read it twice, then folded it carefully and slipped it into the same drawer that held Anna's old letter. He smiled, a quiet, tired smile, and whispered, Good, that's a start. The first sound Walter heard that morning was the creak of the old front gate. It was rusty, hadn't been touched in months, but the noise was unmistakable. Someone was out there. He looked through the kitchen window and froze for a second. Aaron stood by the fence, holding a bag of rice and a small toolbox. His hair was longer, his posture humbler. The last time Walter had seen him, his son was dressed in a suit, voice sharp, eyes clouded with guilt and pride. Now he wore a faded flannel and jeans smudged with dirt. Walter didn't move at first, he just watched. Aaron was testing one of the fence posts, pressing it gently like a doctor checking for a pulse. Then he grabbed a hammer and started working without a word. The sound of nails tapping against wood filled the quiet yard. After a minute, Walter opened the screen door. "You know that fence has been broken since last winter," he said. Aaron didn't turn around. "Yeah, figured it was time to fix it. You could have called." Aaron paused, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Didn't know if you'd answer." Walter leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, the morning sun cutting lines of gold across the porch. "You could have tried anyway." Aaron nodded once, still hammering. "Guess I'm trying now." For a while, neither of them said anything. Just the rhythm of nails, the soft scrape of wood, the occasional bird cutting through the silence. It wasn't awkward, it was quiet in a way that felt like healing. By noon, the fence was straight again. Aaron stepped back, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Not perfect," he muttered, "but it'll hold." Walter stepped closer, inspecting it like he always did when grading a student's project. "You missed a spot," he said, pointing to a crooked board. Aaron smiled faintly. "Guess I'll have to come back and fix it." Walter looked at him, really looked, the tired eyes, the roughened hands, the way guilt had turned into effort. Then he said softly, "You don't earn forgiveness by asking for it, you earn it by showing up." Aaron's eyes flicked up, glistening just a little, but he didn't say thank you. He didn't need to, he just nodded and picked up the next plank. They worked side by side for another hour. No speeches, no apologies, just work, honest, simple work that made the silence between them feel smaller. When they finally stopped, Walter poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to his son. "Still take it black." Aaron nodded. "You remember that. Some things don't fade that easy." They sat on the porch steps, the smell of coffee mixing with the scent of sawdust. The fence stretched out in front of them, straight, clean, solid. Aaron stared ahead, his voice quiet. "I sold a lot of things this past year. The house, the SUV, even some tools, tried to pay off what I owed. It wasn't enough." Walter took a sip, let the warmth fill the space before answering. "It's not about what you pay back. It's about what you build next." Aaron looked at him then the same way he used to as a kid when he just learned something important. "You always make it sound so simple." "It is," Walter said, smiling faintly. "It's just not easy." The wind shifted, carrying the smell of rain and pine. Aaron finished his coffee and set the cup down. "I found a new job," he said. "Smaller company, closer to home. Pays less, but I get to make things with my hands again. Feels right." Walter nodded, pride flickering in his chest. "Your mother would have liked that." Aaron smiled. "Yeah, I think about her every time I drive past the old bridge. I still remember how she used to wave from the porch when I left for school." Walter's voice softened. "She used to wave for me too. Guess some habits skip generations." They sat there for a long time, saying little, just watching the sun dip behind the trees. The shadows stretched across the grass, and for the first time in years the house didn't feel too big for just one man. As Aaron stood to leave, he hesitated. "I'll come back next week. That crooked board's still bothering me." Walter smiled. "I'll keep the coffee warm." Aaron started walking toward his truck, the gravel crunching softly under his boots. Halfway down the path, he turned. "Dad, yeah, I know it doesn't fix everything, but I'm here now." Walter looked at him, older, worn, but finally grounded. "That's enough," he said. "That's how everything gets fixed, one day, one visit at a time." Aaron nodded and got in the truck. The engine started, then faded down the road, leaving only the hum of cicadas and the faint creak of the new fence settling into place. Walter sat back on the porch, the empty cup still warm in his hand. He looked toward the driveway, not at the missing car, but at the road that led home and away again. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like something was missing. He felt beginning. He whispered, mostly to himself, "Rebuilding takes time, but at least we're building again." The morning light broke slow over Portland, soft and golden, the kind of light that doesn't rush you, it just warms what's left standing. Walter rolled out the old electric bike from the garage. The same garage that once held his Honda, the one they tried to take. Now, All that remained was this quiet, humming thing that barely made a sound. And somehow, it fit him better. He adjusted his jacket, slipped on his gloves, and started pedaling down Maple Street, the same road he and Anna used to drive every Sunday morning. Back then, she'd hum along with the radio, her hand resting on his arm, telling him which flowers were blooming on which lawns. The air smelled like spring and memory. As the wind brushed past his face, he thought about how much had changed and how much hadn't. The fences were taller, the houses newer, but the road itself still carried the same cracks he once memorized. Life, he figured, doesn't pave over everything. Some scars stay not to haunt you but to remind you where the turns are. His voice, steady and warm, played like a thought in motion. That day, he said, I didn't lose a car, I lost illusions, and that's freedom. He smiled at how true it sounded now. Back then, it had felt like the end of something, like the world was shrinking around him. But today, as the wind carried the scent of wet pine and earth, it felt like space opening up again. He slowed near the old coffee shop where he used to grade papers. The window still had the same chipped paint. Inside, a couple of students sat hunched over laptops. He almost waved habit, maybe, but kept going. There was somewhere he needed to be. A few blocks later, he reached it. Lincoln High School. The bricks looked a little redder, the paint on the sign a little brighter, but the steps were still uneven and the flag still caught the same morning sun. He parked the bike and stood for a moment, just breathing it in. The sound of sneakers, laughter, the slam of lockers through open windows, all of it felt like echoes stitched into time. Then he heard it. Mr. Grant. He turned. A group of students waved from across the parking lot, one of them wearing a backpack so big it nearly tipped him over. Walter chuckled. Morning, he called back. Did you really teach here? The smallest one asked, eyes wide. Once upon a time, Walter said, a long while ago. Another voice chimed in. My mom said you were the teacher who made her love reading. He blinked, the words catching him off guard. Your mom, yeah, Maya Lopez. Walter laughed softly. Maya, that overachiever, never could stay quiet in class. They grinned. She still doesn't. He waved them off as they ran toward the gym, their voices fading into the morning noise. For a second he just stood there, hand resting on the gate, his chest heavy in that good kind of way, the kind that comes from realizing your story didn't end where you thought it did. The wind picked up, lifting the dust along the road, scattering bits of light through the air. He whispered, mostly to himself, a road never forgets who built it. He got back on his bike, riding slow past the schoolyard. Each turn of the pedal felt lighter than the last. He wasn't chasing anything now, not justice, not redemption, just the rhythm of peace. At the next red light, he stopped. The world was quiet except for a few birds and the hum of his old motor. He looked down the stretch of asphalt ahead, long, straight, glowing in the sunrise. He smiled. Funny, he murmured. When you're young, you drive fast so you don't miss a thing. When you're older, you slow down so you finally see it all. The light turned green. He rode on, past the bakery where he and Anna bought their first anniversary cake, past the park bench where Aaron used to wait for the bus, past the lives he'd built, broken, and rebuilt again. Nothing about the world owed him peace, but it offered it in quiet ways to those who stayed long enough to notice. As he turned onto the last stretch home, he felt the sun hit his back, warm and sure. Maybe forgiveness wasn't a conversation, he thought. Maybe it was just the steady act of moving forward. His voice softened, carrying the final thought like a note left on a windowsill. If someone ever made you feel small for being kind, remember, quiet strength builds longer roads. Tell me where you're watching from because you're not alone. The bike kept humming beneath him. The camera would pull back here, the road stretching ahead, the figure of a man growing smaller against the light. And as the screen faded, only his voice remained, calm and certain, carried by the wind. You see, kindness doesn't end at the driveway. It keeps going right where the road remembers your name.